Welcome to A Glorious Mess, the life of Jacob, part 4. You know, we left off last week with Laban cheating Jacob and how bad it all looked and how Jacob was reaping what he'd actually sown himself. And the truth is when we get into those darkest moments, friends, we think we're dead in the water. It's all bad. But the truth is God had Jacob right where he wanted him to be. He just kept pushing Jacob back in till he was worn out and he would run to God. God never left him. He doesn't leave you or me. Jesus promised he would never leave us or forsake us. And we talked last week about the whole price of cheating others. You reap what you sow, friends. If you're going to lie, scheme, steal, you're going to pay a price for it. Jesus actually put it this way: if you live by the sword, you'll die by the sword. And see, the truth was Laban was more devious than Jacob. And Jacob began to see himself there, and they both spent a ton of time trying to figure out how to shake the other one down. But at the end of the day, it drove Jacob back to God. And how many times has God driven you back to him, protected you, or even allowed you into a difficult situation and then extracted you from it just to get your attention, friends? How many times he protected you from unknown danger? I'm guessing many, many times. Because listen, God did that with Jacob. Once he put him in with Laban and things got really bad, Laban's like, dude, I'm killing you. Just like Esau was going to kill him. Now everybody wants to kill Jacob. But it says in verse 24, it says, God came to Laban in a dream that night and said to him, be careful that you do not speak to Jacob either good or bad. It's in my power to do you harm. But the God of your father spoke to me last night and said, be careful not to speak either good or bad to Jacob. So Laban's thinking like this: I can kill you, dude, but God told me not to. So I'm not going to kill you. I'm not going to harm you. Because see, God, friends, God does that to you and for you and I. He protects us sometimes from ourselves. You know, when you get and you start walking through the different chapters on Jacob's life, you see that over and over. Protected from Esau, protected from Laban. God protects us when we don't even know it. When you look at chapter 32, verses 6, 7, and 8, you realize that God is still doing this. Esau starts to come after him just as soon as Laban had released him. In chapter 32, it says this: the messengers returned to Jacob and reported, we met your brother Esau. So he goes from one fire into another one. Laban lets him go. Esau's right after him because God's trying to drive him back into his father's heart. So Esau's coming after him. He says he's already on the way. He's got an army of 400 men. Jacob was terrified at that news. That's exactly what God wanted to have happen. He divided up his household with the two wives, sent one way, one the other way. He thought to himself, if Esau meets one group and attacks it, perhaps the other group can escape. But he never factored God into this, friends. He was so in himself, just like you and I, under pressure sometimes, that he never considered, what's God doing? Listen to me for just a second. Every time you see a crisis, every time you're in a crisis, think like this: what is God doing? What's God doing with Syrian refugees? What's God doing in the Middle East? What's God doing at your work? What's God doing? Always think like this: there's something spiritual going on behind this. That's exactly what Jacob missed in his battles with Laban and Esau. And that's exactly what God was doing. He deserved way less than that, but friends, God doesn't abandon you. See, what God was trying to do is push him into his heart so he could break his heart and rebuild this person. If you walk with God very long, you'll figure that out, that he'll squeeze you. He'll allow circumstances to squeeze you. He'll close in on you and squeeze you only because he loves you. This is what happened to Jacob when he's wandering through the desert. He starts in verses 9, 10, 11, and 12 to pray his heart. His fear and his faith starts to rise back up. God starts to capture him. And this is where the story starts to turn for Jacob. The promises that God had used to sustain him, I'm going to take care of you with the land, I'm going to provide for you, it all starts to come to pass now. And here's what you need to think. Has it ever really crossed your mind that Jesus never schemed with the Father? Jesus never tried to create big plans to outwit people. Jesus was actually planless. He just went to the Father every day and said, what do you want to do? I'm not saying you shouldn't think about the way you live. You shouldn't plan ahead for your retirement. I'm not saying any of that. I'm saying this: be careful when you start scheming, because scheming can become very difficult and very treacherous quickly. And that's exactly what happened to Jacob. He moved from being a spiritual man at all into being a schemer. And then God tries to turn him back into a spiritual man. And the truth was, he lived daily. Jesus lived daily out of his Father's heart. And God was trying to get Jacob to do the same thing. Jesus did not live out of his own plans. But what if you and I would learn to do that, friends? What if we didn't just always come up with a new plan to extricate ourselves, but we bowed down to God? See, this is Jacob. Sends his family this way, and then finally he bows down and he meets God. And he does it in one of the most fascinating texts in the whole world. It says in Genesis 32:24 that Jacob was left alone. This is the crux of Jacob's whole life. He's left alone. He's abandoned. He feels alone. And this is where God wanted him to be. And then he wrestles, it says, with a man until daybreak. When he saw that he had not prevailed against him, he touched the socket of his thigh. That would be the man. So the socket of Jacob's thigh was dislocated when he wrestled with him. Then, listen to verse 26. He said, "Let me go, for the dawn is breaking." But Jacob said, "I will not let you go unless you bless me." Because he had run headlong, friends, into God. When he said he would not let him go, he said, "Your name shall no longer be Jacob, but Israel. For you have striven with God and with man, and you have prevailed." So God literally declared, this wrestling match that you had today was not with a man, it was with God. And Jacob asked him and said, "Who are you? Tell me your name." And he said to him, "Why is it that you ask my name?" And then he blessed him there. Because God said, "Look, I've already declared to you who I am. You wrestle with God and with men, and you prevail because you grab the hold of God again." And that's what God was always after, friends. Whenever you're in a struggle, don't let go of God. Hold on, hold on, hold on. And he called a place Peniel because it literally means I've seen God face to face, but I lived. That's a picture here of you and I, friends. God wrestling with us to break us and then rebuild us. Jacob held on, ended up lame, but strong. Ended up as a spiritual man. He started out as a clever, strong person, self-sufficient, super sure of himself, going to take his own way, make his own plan, and God had to break his human strength and wisdom. That's the picture here of Jacob wrestling and then becoming Israel. It literally says a man wrestled with him until daybreak. Why? Because he wouldn't yield. He held on all night long, like many of us. Hold on. Jacob was used to resisting God, and he was really good at it. And God said, "Look, I'm going to break you down until I can build you back up." Friends, that's part of the journey. The night was long, it says in verse 26. And finally, he said this, "Would you just bless me? Instead of me relying on my own plan, would you bless me?" And God did. Friends, that's all you and I need to do. And God changed his name from schemer, Jacob, into Israel, one who wrestles with God. Literally, that's what it means, a prince with God. Your name indicates your nature. And Jacob's nature was old and nasty and broken, but he became Israel, a prince with God, or one who holds on to God, a prince that literally holds on and has power with God. So he limped away from this whole event, friends. It's outwardly broken, but inwardly new and fresh, touched by the presence of God, like he wants to touch you. So maybe you're asking, you mean God would let something physical happen so you spiritually could be born deeper? Yeah, sure he would, because he sees eternally. He saw that night as a new possibility. But he he only had to do that with this guy because he was so darn stubborn. If he hadn't been so stubborn, if he hadn't always fought and schemed, it wouldn't have gone like that. So here's what God wants to say to you and to me in the first few verses of chapter 33, that there is a possibility to be a new man. And do you know Jacob is called Jacob again in chapter 33 after he wrestled with God? Only because he was so stubborn. Instead of being Israel and becoming all that he was supposed to be, he fell back into his old ways. God had to keep rebuilding him. But here's the good news. God did. God did. He took him back to Bethel and began to restore his whole life, because that's where he had started with God that very first night when he walked away after stealing his brother's birthright was in Bethel. And so we're going to talk about that next week. We'll jump in there next week. I hope you guys have a great time discussing all the wrestling that we're supposed to do with God, holding on to God in the midst of the struggle. Don't let go. God bless you. Have a great week.